My name is Sarah, and from a young age, I learned a bitter lesson. In my family, love was never distributed equally. My older brother Daniel was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. He wasn't just praised on every occasion, he was given the best of everything our family had to offer. And me? I was the shadow in the background, the one they remembered only when chores needed doing or when they wanted to compare someone to Daniel to boost his praise even more. I still remember that Christmas when I was 7. Daniel tore open the biggest box under the tree and screamed with joy when he saw the newest gaming console. My parents beamed, and my mom even pulled out her phone to record this special moment. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn, trying not to get my hopes up too much. My gift? A gray t-shirt from a clearance rack, tag still on, $3.99, with the logo of some plumbing company on it. Too big, too ugly, and way too obvious that no one had bothered to choose it for me. My mom just smiled and said, "Sweetie, you should learn to be content. Daniel's older. He needs more important things." I forced a smile, then sat in the corner watching Daniel play his new game. The screen's glow lighting up his thrilled face, while I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Holidays never got better. For Daniel's 16th birthday, they threw a huge outdoor party. There was a live band, it was held at a lakeside park, and they gave him a brand new Ford with a big red bow on the hood. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. For me, I got to invite 2 friends over for frozen pizza at home, sitting under the weak yellow light in the living room. My birthday gift? A cheap notebook and a ballpoint pen. Not even a cute one, just the kind people hand out for free at job fairs. "You're practical," my dad said. "You don't need anything fancy." But Daniel got all the fancy things, even though he never had to ask. When he went to college, my parents covered his full tuition and gave him monthly spending money. As for me, I got a stack of student loan applications and a long lecture about growing up and being independent. No one asked if I was okay, if I had enough to eat, or if I was exhausted from working late-night shifts. I used to believe that if I just worked harder, things would change, but by the time I graduated, that last bit of hope had shattered. Daniel was welcomed home with a big backyard celebration, confetti poppers, a 3-tiered cake, cheers from relatives. My parents gave him a starter home in the northern suburbs as a reward for all his hard work. Me? I walked into our small dining room, where only my parents sat, along with a takeout box of fast food. They handed me a plain white envelope. I hoped it might be a small check to help cover my remaining tuition debt, but inside was a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. "Just for fun," my mom said cheerfully, like it was the cutest little joke. "Maybe you'll hit it big?" I looked up at them. Neither of them looked guilty or even awkward. My dad shrugged. "You know how it is. All our money went into Daniel's house." I smiled. A tired, hollow smile. I folded the ticket, tucked it into the pocket of my worn coat, and nodded. But inside, I wasn't angry. I was empty. Turns out, I was never part of the real plan in my family. And now, I was beginning to understand that if I wanted a place in this world, I'd have to make it myself, without expecting anyone to hand it to me. After that silent graduation dinner, I packed everything I owned, some old clothes, a beat-up laptop, and a chipped red suitcase, and left the house I'd never truly felt welcome in. I rented a tiny studio apartment in downtown Cincinnati, where car horns at midnight and the orange glow of streetlights replaced the cold silence of my parents' home. My apartment was barely big enough for a single bed, a small desk, and a noisy electric stove that buzzed every time I turned it on. The walls were stained off-white, the pipes leaked when it got cold, and arguments from the neighbors passed through paper-thin walls. But at least it was mine. No one belittled me. No one compared me to Daniel. No one told me I should be grateful for discount clothes during the holidays. I worked 2 jobs to survive. During the day, I was a marketing assistant at a small billboard company. At night, I worked at a bakery near the market, serving customers, wiping tables, and taking out the trash until nearly midnight. In those first weeks, I'd come home with aching feet, hands smelling like flour and fryer grease. But I felt lighter than I ever had back home. My family rarely texted, never called to ask how I was doing. In the family group chat, where I was still technically included, everything still revolved around Daniel. My mom would send photos of him posing with his new car or smiling in their newly remodeled living room for the third time. My dad sent videos of Daniel and his girlfriend vacationing in Florida with the caption, "The kid deserves it all." I was never part of those conversations. Even when I dropped in a simple check-in, "How's everyone doing?" the replies were just a few half-hearted emojis. Sometimes, I wondered if I disappeared. Would anyone even notice? The $2 lottery ticket my mom gave me on graduation night still sat in the drawer next to the kitchen, buried under a few coins, a dried-out pen, and an overdue electric bill. I never bothered to scratch it. To me, it was a bitter reminder that in my parents' eyes, that's all I was worth. A vague chance instead of a real investment. Every night I'd pass that drawer. Sometimes I'd run my fingers over the wrinkled edge of the ticket, then shut it again. I told myself I was used to being overlooked, that I didn't need anyone's approval. But sometimes, in those quietest hours, I'd still hear my mother's voice echoing in my mind. Daniel needs more. Like a splinter under my skin, I carried it with me even in sleep. Then one Friday evening, I was invited to a small party hosted by a coworker. While I sat quietly at the dessert table, a girl named Marissa, from the creative team, started chatting with me. After a while talking about work, she tilted her head, smiled, and asked, "Sarah, how come I never hear you talk about your family?" I hesitated, then just said, "Maybe because they never really saw me as part of it." Marissa didn't pry. She just nodded, like she understood more than anyone ever had. That feeling of being heard without being judged felt like a tiny crack opening somewhere deep inside. That night, when I got home, I opened the drawer. For the first time in months, I picked up the ticket and stared at the numbers under the thin silver coating. My heart slowed. I didn't know why, but something nudged me. Not because I wanted to be rich, but because I was tired of believing I had no worth. I laid the ticket on the table, grabbed my phone, and looked up how to check it on the state's lottery website. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new message from the family group chat. I opened it. It was a photo Daniel had just posted. He stood in front of a house, arm around his girlfriend, and behind them was a wooden sign that read, "Playground for our firstborn, coming soon." Underneath were messages from my parents. "So proud. Daniel's going to be a dad. Couldn't be happier." Not a single word from me. I gave a small laugh. But this time, it wasn't bitter. I set my phone down, uncapped the pen, and gently scratched off the silver layer. No matter what the outcome was, I was ready for change. I could barely breathe as the numbers revealed themselves. My heart pounded so hard I had to place a hand over my chest to make sure I was still conscious. I blinked, repeating each number under my breath, afraid I was reading them wrong. 8, 14, 27, 33, 42, 56. I looked at my phone screen, where the Ohio Lottery website flashed. "Congratulations! You've won the jackpot, $134 million. I dropped the pen and stared at the ticket like it had just burst into flame in front of me. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dream. I had really won. The whole apartment seemed to hold its breath with me. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down like people do on TV. I just sat there, silent, hands trembling, mind spinning with a single question. Now what? I didn't call anyone. There wasn't a single person in my life I felt safe sharing this with. My family? They wouldn't ask how I felt. They'd only ask how much I planned to share. That same night, I sat down at my laptop and typed into the search bar, "What to do when you win the lottery?" Hundreds of results came up, but I chose one from a well-known financial site. The first tip it emphasized: don't tell anyone. Find a trustworthy financial advisor. I wrote down a few of the top-rated names in the city. After a lot of thought, I chose someone named Carol Whitman, a financial expert with over 20 years of experience, whose office was on the 19th floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Cincinnati. I was so nervous before that first meeting, I almost didn't go. I wore my simplest dress, tied my hair back neatly, and arrived 15 minutes early. Carol's office smelled like peppermint tea and soft jazz music played in the background. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her bright brown eyes looking like they'd seen hundreds of stories just like mine before. "This isn't something that happens every day," Carol said after I told her everything in one breath. "But it's not magic either. We're going to turn this into a long-term opportunity, not a one-time stroke of luck." For 3 hours, she helped me create a detailed plan. I wouldn't claim the prize under my real name. We'd set up a limited liability company, an LLC, to receive the funds. That way, my identity would stay completely private. Carol called in a tax attorney, then an investment specialist. The team worked together like they were the only people in the world I could trust. Maybe they really were. After submitting all the paperwork and completing the process, I received my first check. $85 million after taxes, transferred into a new account under the company's name. I couldn't believe I was holding a number that used to exist only in my dreams. I once ate instant noodles for 3 straight months just to save money for the electric bill. Now, I could buy the entire building I lived in. But I didn't. I started with small steps, paid off my student loans, cleared all my credit card balances, moved out of my old apartment and into a small, quiet house in the suburbs where the maple trees turned a brilliant red every fall. No mansion, no sports car. I bought a gray hybrid Lexus, sleek, classy, but low profile. I kept my daytime marketing job, at least for the first few weeks. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed time to get used to this new version of myself, a Sarah who wasn't constantly backed into a corner. The only job I quit right away was the evening shift at the bakery. I wrote a handwritten thank you letter to the owner, along with a small check to help expand the cake display. It was the kindest goodbye I'd ever written. What surprised me most wasn't the feeling of freedom, it was the peace. Every morning I brewed coffee in a sunlit kitchen and looked out over the backyard where the sparrows chirped. I'd sit down, open a book, no longer worrying about payment deadlines or my mom's passive-aggressive calls. That lottery ticket now hangs in a small glass frame next to my desk, not as a brag, but as a reminder that sometimes the only thing we need is a chance, even if it comes from the most unexpected place. And that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else to give me worth. I found it in my own hands. Life after that felt like a dream, but the kind you protect, quietly, like a secret you don't want to wake from. I officially left the marketing job after 3 months. On my last day, I brought 2 boxes of cinnamon waffles and a small bouquet of lavender to thank everyone. I told them I'd been offered a freelance opportunity at a creative agency in Seattle. No one questioned it. I had always worked hard, always dreamed bigger. A week later, I moved to Edgewood, a quiet suburb in southern Ohio. I bought a 2-story modern farmhouse with a wide backyard, an open kitchen with granite island and tall windows that welcomed the morning sun. A few neighbors joked I must have struck it big with unicorn stock. I just smiled faintly and said I freelance remotely for a foreign company. Vague enough that no one asked more. The car I picked was a pearl-white Tesla, smooth and silent, like my new life. I registered it under the company's name with a personalized plate that simply read, SK27. No one but me knew it stood for Sarah King, my name and my birth date. Every morning, I brewed coffee with my new machine, stood on the balcony, and looked at the tree-lined driveway, feeling light. I started writing, not for money, but because I wanted to. I wrote children's stories, something I'd dreamed of doing for years but was always told was impractical. Carol helped me invest in a small independent publishing house. On weekends, I attended watercolor classes at a nearby studio. It was the first time I'd truly lived freely. No rigid schedules, no comparisons. No, if Daniel could do it, why can't you? I stayed completely off social media. No photos, no updates. But rumors have a way of slipping through. It all started with Chloe, a college classmate who once shared a dorm with me. One afternoon, I got a message from her. "Sarah, did you just buy a house in Edgewood? I swear I saw your photo in the neighborhood group and freaked out." I nearly dropped my phone. In this neighborhood, residents often shared photos of new standouts. This time, it was my Tesla parked beside a mailbox labeled S. King with the caption, "What does our new neighbor do to be this rich? Free Starbucks to whoever guesses right." I rushed to remove my name from the mailbox and re-registered everything under the company. But it was too late. Chloe didn't say anything else, but a week later, I saw 3 missed calls from my mom. I didn't call back. 2 days later, I got a text from my cousin Lucas. "So you really moved to Edgewood? Everyone's talking. Your mom thinks you came into some money. They even asked if I knew anything." My heart sank. After years of being forgotten, it took just a photo of a car and a new house for them to suddenly remember I existed. I didn't reply to Lucas, but I knew the thing I'd feared most had finally happened. I couldn't stay hidden forever. Rumors spread like wind, and in my family, even a small breeze was enough to spark wild expectations. The next morning, while watering the plants, I saw a familiar black SUV slowly drive past and stop right in front of my gate. My heart thudded. The window rolled down, and I saw Daniel, my brother, behind the wheel. Sitting next to him was my mom, hair perfectly curled, eyes full of curiosity she didn't bother to hide. I ducked behind a maple tree, my heart racing. They stared at my house for a while, then Daniel turned to Mom and said something. I couldn't hear it, but I could guess. It's probably her. The car drove off, but the dust from its tires lingered in my mind like a warning. That night, I sat in the living room, warm yellow light falling across the wooden floor, but I didn't feel comforted like usual. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "We need to talk. We'll come visit you soon." I locked the screen. No response. I had earned my freedom. But now, the question was, what would I do to protect it? My mom's texts kept coming all week, sometimes gentle. "Sweetheart, I just want to see you. I miss you." Sometimes casual. "We're making your favorite stew this Sunday. Want to join for dinner?" And sometimes sweet in that forced, sugary way. Family is forever, Sarah. No matter where you live or what you do, you'll always be part of us. I didn't reply to any of them. But I didn't block the number either. I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. Finally, after 2 weeks of silence, Daniel called me directly. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment, then picked up. "Sarah," he began, sounding overly cheerful. "Listen, Mom's really upset you've been avoiding us. Seriously, she cried all night yesterday." He paused, then shifted tone, like he was getting to the real reason. "So, me and Haley, we're getting married, did you hear? We're having the ceremony this coming spring. Mom and Dad are thrilled." I leaned back into the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Yeah, I heard." I replied briefly. "So, why don't you come home for dinner this Sunday? The whole family'll be there. Just come for fun. We're still family, right?" I stayed silent for a moment, then agreed. Part of me wanted to know what they really wanted. Another part wanted to remind myself why I had walked away in the first place. Sunday night, I drove to the old house, the one I used to believe would one day love me back if I just tried hard enough. Same white picket fence, same stone walkway, same old swing still dangling under the porch. But I wasn't the girl who stood there waiting for praise anymore. Mom opened the door and hugged me just a little too tightly. "You're so skinny," she said, then walked straight to the kitchen without waiting for a reply. Dad gave a nod, like I was a guest. Daniel patted me hard on the back like we were long-lost friends reunited after vacation. Dinner went exactly how I expected. Conversation entirely about Daniel and Haley. Mom showed off the dress they'd picked. Dad talked about how they'd decorate the backyard for the wedding. I just sat there, smiled faintly, picked up my food, and counted the minutes until the performance ended. As dessert arrived, Mom tapped her spoon gently against her glass, the soft clink ringing out like a signal. "I have something to say," she began, eyes fixed on me. "Daniel and Haley are really excited for the wedding, but, putting together a proper ceremony and expanding the house so they can move in, it's going to cost quite a bit." I set my glass down. My hand was steady. I was ready. "And, since you're doing so well," Mom continued, her voice sliding into sugar-coated sweetness, "the family thought, maybe, if you could help just a little, around $100,000 to build a new garage and help with some wedding expenses." Dad nodded, as if it had already been settled. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smiling expectantly. "Sarah," he said, "I know you get it. We're family, blood. Helping each other when it matters should be a given." I looked at them all, my eyes no longer holding any hope, just a quiet calm. The kind I had fought so hard to earn. "Family?" I repeated, my voice steady. "Where was family when I was in college? When I worked 2 jobs and lived off instant noodles for a month? Where were you then?" No one answered. "What was it Mom said to me back then?" I tilted my head and looked at her. "Oh, right. No one's stopping you from working harder." "Well, now I have. I worked harder, but not to pay for the things you dismissed." No one smiled, no one argued. I stood up, picked up my purse, and looked at them one last time. "I used to hope you'd see me. I used to hope to be part of this family, but not anymore. And if you really want to expand your garage," I turned to Daniel and smiled, "then no one's stopping you from working harder." I walked out the door, feeling like an old, creaky door in my heart had quietly, firmly closed. And this time, I didn't look back. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, just the soft hum of the tires against the road and the gentle wind slipping through the cracked window. In the rearview mirror, the glow of my old house blurred like a fading memory. But I knew I hadn't just left that place physically, I'd left it in spirit, too. When I got home, I sank onto the living room couch, slipped off my heels, and let out a long, deep breath. The relief didn't come all at once. Instead, there was a quiet sadness, like I had just said goodbye to something that once meant everything, even if it had hurt me so many times. But this time was different. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't a child trying to earn love through good behavior. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop, messages from Mom. "What did you mean by that? I never treated you any differently. Family always comes first. You really hurt me, Sarah." Then from Daniel, "I don't even know who you are anymore. We just needed a little help and you acted like a stranger." I dropped the phone into a drawer and locked it. I'd heard these lines all my life. The only difference now was I didn't believe them anymore. I started my new days on my own terms. No rigid schedule, no urge to prove anything. Each morning I got up early, brewed coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sunlight spill across the front lawn. I wrote more, read more, even started learning to play the ukulele. Something I had dreamed of in high school but never got encouragement to pursue. I invested in a few small projects with Carol's guidance, my financial advisor who had become more like a close friend. We talked every week, not just about money but about life, balance, self-worth, and real freedom. My house grew warmer with time. I planted more lavender along the fence, added a small swing in the backyard, and built a tall bookshelf in the living room. Every item I chose, every corner I decorated, felt like a declaration. I was no longer living inside someone else's mold. One late fall afternoon, as I was watering the garden, I heard the doorbell ring. On the front step was a white envelope with no name. I opened it. Inside was an old family photo, me, Daniel, Mom, and Dad, taken on a summer trip to Lake Erie. On the back was one line: No matter where you are, home is still home. I didn't smile. I didn't feel sad. I just quietly folded the photo and placed it in the drawer next to the fireplace. I didn't rip it. Didn't throw it away. I just didn't belong there anymore. A week later, I received an invitation to an art exhibition in Columbus. One of my children's short stories had been illustrated and displayed in the new authors section. I drove there alone, with soft jazz playing in the car and a light buzz of excitement in my chest. No one clapped when I entered the gallery. No one took pictures of me next to the display. But I felt whole. More complete than I ever did standing beside Daniel, soaking up empty praise. After the exhibit, I sat alone in a small cafe down the street, jotting down new ideas in my leather notebook. A little girl at the next table watched me for a while, then walked over. "Are you the one who wrote Little Moon?" she asked, eyes bright. I nodded and smiled. "I really love that story. You're a great writer." That sentence, from a complete stranger, warmed my heart in a way I had waited my whole life to feel from the people closest to me. I thanked her and returned to my table, my chest filled with quiet joy. I had nothing left to prove, no one left to impress. I had stepped out of the invisible cage called family duty, and for the first time in my life I was living, truly living, with the clear belief that I was worthy of good things. Not because anyone said so, but because I had found that worth within myself. Through the smallest things. The months that followed passed like a cool breeze on a sweltering summer day. My new life wasn't flashy or loud, but it was full of things I never dared to dream of when I lived under that old roof. I invested in a few edtech startups Carol introduced me to, bought a small cabin in Vermont for long retreats, and, every so often, I treated myself to a trip, not to escape but to explore. I had mornings sipping coffee by the beach in Santa Barbara, afternoons reading beneath old oak trees in Oregon, and evenings watching fireworks from a vintage hotel balcony in Savannah. No more financial stress, no more tightrope walking around icy glances or passive digs. With each passing day, I felt closer to the woman I had always hidden deep inside. I began writing more regularly. Children's stories, filled with imagination, small but brave characters, dreams dismissed by others but never truly extinguished. My debut book was published by a small press in Chicago, and strangely, I felt no urge to show it off to anyone in my family. For the first time, success wasn't tied to outside approval. I stopped checking messages from Mom or Daniel. Carol helped me move all personal contact to private channels. The people who really cared about me were already in my life. New friends, a few sincere professional relationships, and most importantly, one Saturday afternoon, as I waited for my order at my favorite organic bakery downtown, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sarah?" I turned. It was Daniel. He wore a gray plaid shirt, his hair a little messy, like he had just stepped out of the car. He didn't look much different from the last time we met, except now his eyes had lost their old confidence. Instead, they carried a trace of weariness, a hint of bitterness. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said with a weak smile. "You live around here?" I nodded, polite but distant. "Yeah, close by. You?" Daniel shrugged. "Just picking up pastries for Haley. She's pregnant with our second." He paused. "Mom still talks about you all the time." I said nothing. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Daniel looked at me directly, voice quieter. "You know, sometimes I think this world just isn't fair." I tilted my head, my gaze calm, and replied clearly, "I agree. Life isn't fair. But I learned how to make it fair for myself." Daniel curled his lips like he wanted to say something but stayed quiet. Maybe he understood that I wasn't the same little sister who once sat quietly at the dinner table, smiling through pain. I didn't need them to know I was worthy. His silence said it all. He knew I had outgrown the box they tried to keep me in. A bakery employee called my name and handed me the warm bag. I nodded in thanks, turned to Daniel. I really do wish you the best. I mean that. I walked away without looking back. Under the soft golden sun stretching across the sidewalk, I moved slowly, steadily. I didn't need to win. I just needed to live. That night, I sat on my porch, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, eyes lifted to a sky sprinkled with stars. The wind rustled the lavender by the fence. I thought of the years that had passed, all the times I was forgotten, compared, made to feel like the extra piece. I once believed I was just a flawed version of something better, something Daniel represented, but now I knew the truth. I wasn't a copy of anyone. I was Sarah, someone who had been overlooked, dismissed, but also someone who rose and rebuilt a life from the pieces. Is life unfair? Maybe. But I made it fair, with my own hands and my own belief. And the freedom I have now, no one can take that away. From a girl underestimated by her own family, Sarah had moved beyond old wounds to build a life of freedom and value with her own two hands. She no longer sought validation from those who once hurt her, but instead learned to love herself and live in alignment with what she believed in. Sarah's story reminds us, no one has the right to define your worth, except you. Sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships is the very first step toward finding true happiness. What do you think of Sarah's journey? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow our channel for more powerful and inspiring stories about family and self-worth.